Okay, thank you everybody for attending. May I welcome all members, officers and invitees to the Learning Communities Overview and Scrutiny meeting. Just to confirm, as a council, we welcome the use of the Welsh language within our public meetings, but I can confirm I have not received any notification or requests to use Welsh today. Therefore, the meeting will be conducted in English only. May I remind you that the meeting is being webcast, therefore please turn your mobile phones onto silent and ensure you speak clearly into your microphones. Can I also remind all members to sign the attendance register and confirm if any apologies have been received for this meeting. Have we had any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we've got apologies from Councillors Overton, Tew and Williams and Dr Sheridan.
No, any others? No. Are there any declarations of interest then, item 2? No, if any come up, just remember to write them into the book as well. Agenda item 3 then, minutes of the last meeting. Members, are there any issues you wish to raise on accuracy of the minutes? No, in that case, are we happy to confirm them as a true record? You ready? Yeah. Brilliant, thank you. Scroll down, we're going on to item 4, the action sheet, if I invite Becky to run through it.
Thank you, Chair. I have nothing to add on the action sheet at this point unless members have any questions.
Give an update on that. Members, sorry about that. The framework for the inspection of local authorities has changed. We're now in a new cycle. And we've been in discussion with Eston and with the rally about the SER in its traditional form as a standalone document is not something that Eston actually wants to see anymore. So what they want to see is evidence of ongoing self-evaluation woven through the performance management and planning cycle for councils and for local authority education services. So that standalone chunky telephone directory isn't being produced. So I think, as Chair, one of the things that we probably in a planning session to talk to you about, well, how do we now make sure that you are updated in terms of where we are with our self-evaluation, which isn't in the same format. And just on that, both myself and Sharon Davis are on peer inspector training for local authority inspections next week. So actually that will give us a very good insight, we hope, into the expectations that Eston have to make sure that we're compliant with what they think a good self-evaluation looks like. We haven't been given a template per se, and they'll say that there won't be one because everyone's self-evaluation process will be slightly different. So we're reviewing what we've done. We've got an annual plan now in terms of what we do around performance management, how that fits into the sessions here for overview and scrutiny, into corporate performance assessment sessions as well, and what we're doing internally. So probably there's a discussion to be had, maybe to look at, well, what's the best way to give you an update, and I'd suggest that'll happen best when we know what the peer inspector training looks like, and that'll be next week. Okay.
Any other questions on the action sheet? Okay, then we'll go on to agenda item 5. We may be expecting Mererid from Public Health Wales. She's not here yet, but she may come in later. So we're going to be looking at the improving outcomes for children and young people, proposed partnership arrangements for the Children and Young People Board and the Public Service Board. So Dermot is going to give us a presentation. I don't know if he needs any introduction. Yeah.
Thank you. So we're going to do this slightly differently. So the screen behind you gives you just a quick sort of run through of the key issues that are contained in the report. The report was written just before we went to the Public Service Board. So this, some of the content of what you're going to see today has obviously been shared with the Public Service Board, but we're not at a finish point. I think one of the things to point out around where we are with the wellbeing plan that the Public Service Board is responsible for, and we've got responsibility for, is that it's still evolving and still being shaped. So the purpose for me for today, at least in part, is to really make sure that you as members understand what we think are the key issues that we need to get on with, and some of the key areas of work, to make sure that you're informed about what's in the, and I'm sure you already are, but just to recap on what's in the wellbeing plan already. and to just seek your views on, well, what else should we be doing? What areas do we need to investigate further? Are there things that we have missed? Are there things that need more emphasis? Are things that should be taken out and other things substituted in? Because this is a work in progress, and this will continue to evolve. So I hope that fits with your expectations, Chair, as well. What I'll do as I go through this is, if at any point, because it's quite involved and there's quite a lot of material potentially in it, and I'm sure you've got lots of questions, I'll stop regularly through it, or if you've got questions, I'm happy to take them as we go. And my remote control works by me pressing this screen, and the opposite by me pressing that one. So, there we go. Works a treat. We can't get a zapper to work. So, just obviously a reminder, what we're in the business of doing here is making sure that our corporate plan priorities, and I've just put up obviously the one around raising educational attainment, fit with what's in the Public Service Board. We're not working across purposes, and we also want to make sure that we have clarity then about how all of the work we're talking about today fits into service planning, because we're in the middle of preparing those service plans, which are due in, I think, in November, and also that we're supporting our colleagues in other organisations in terms of what they're doing, so that we're not working against each other and we're being as efficient as we can. So corporate plan priority raising educational attainment, obvious, but obviously supporting vulnerable people is obviously part of this as well. It's not just about older folks, it's about children and young people and their families as well. So that's obviously a starting point for us. Objective 3 within the wellbeing plan is on the screen for you now. And some of the things that surprised me about the wellbeing plan, because I wasn't directly involved in all of the creation of it, a couple of things to throw out. There is no objective about children and young people. There's no single one place where we as a constellation of public services have said, 0 to 25, so children and young people for me is 0 to 25. We're not going to have a particular focus on that. It's woven through the objectives. And that's fine, there's ways of doing it. It just means then when we come to scrutinise and plan and make sure that we're on track, we have to bring those threads back in again. So what we've got there, coordinate the system of early years universal interventions, resource proportionate to need. Well, we're doing that anyway. Some of this is stuff that we have to do in any case. Make the most of current antenatal support, ensure access to evidence-based parenting. Fine, and then encourage families to take up healthy child Wales. Great, that's all in the first 5 years. That's stuff we should be doing right now and actually is underway. In the medium term, over the next 10 years, plan and coordinate partnership action to prevent and reduce the impact of ACEs. Now, ACEs are adverse childhood experiences, and many of you no doubt will have heard a whole plethora of different organisations have been funded to get on with raising awareness around ACEs and intervention to try and minimise the impact. So that work's ongoing as well, even though it's got a 10-year timescale. And in the long term, 10 to 15 years, Wellbeing and Future Generations Act, long time scale, prevent and reduce childhood overweight and obesity by implementing the partnership action, etc. That work's ongoing already too. So within Objective 3, we've got some very sensible points of intervention, but all of which I'd say we're already doing, and may not necessarily be some of the things we need to get on and accelerate. So we'll come and look at what we think some of those areas might be in a second. But that's how Objective 3 stands at the moment. And just for reference, the 7 objectives are in your presentation and on the screen. And the 2 that link with 3, so 3 is obviously the one we just looked at, that MES, Merid, was referred to as MES, and I co-sponsor, are 5 and 6, particularly around tackling intergeneration patterns of poverty, as you'd expect, and then improve local skills and workforce planning. So some of the headlines coming out of those 2, just to give you a flavour of them: supporting people to gain skills and capabilities to find a job, core function of schools, I would have thought that. Ensuring young people leave school with support, advice, skills, confidence to move successfully, and not become NEETs, not become, not in education, training or employment. Supporting people to be good parents, helping parents to share care and stay in work. Access to high quality, flexible, affordable childcare. That'll be a theme, no doubt, that we'll look at in early years, and we're already advancing quite rapidly with the childcare initiative, and a very good uptake so far. Early indications are showing. Pleased with that. and ensuring all children from low-income backgrounds can succeed in school. These are coterminous for us. All of these things are all about children and young people. It's one theme. It just happens to be split across 3 different strands. Hi, Mez. Hi, Mez. Okay, you're most welcome. I could be mean and say, this is your bit now for the rest, but I'm not going to do it. It'd be horrible of me. So where we got to were a number of themes that were emerging that we need to look at in trying to pull together an overview of what we need to do for children and young people. Some of this is given. Some of the things that we currently do, clearly we're going to continue to do. But 4 areas emerged that we need to really focus in on and look at how we can make sure in the partnership framework, this isn't just council activity. And messages from public health, for example, part of the strength, I think, in us co-sponsoring is that we already have built in some partnership working at the front end of this. This has to involve colleagues from health, in terms of ABHB, but also public health. It has to involve colleagues from across council services, social care, and other parts of the council, the police, etc., and the third sector. Positive pathways, which we'll come back to, because that's an existing group, but that's about vulnerable children, really, beyond the early years. Participation and engagement. Are we actually ensuring that we're listening to children, and children are driving the agenda, as we are required to ensure that is happening. And then a well-being offer, because one of our objectives as a council is to promote well-being. What are we doing around that, and how is that currently working? One of the things that comes out in that slide already is we're divided by a common language, because again, well-being is defined quite differently, or a bit differently, or just subtly differently, between all the different agencies. We've got a slightly different focus, so we'll come on to that when we look at that as a particular theme. Is that okay so far, members? Okay. So just looking at one of the things I just thought would be useful, because this is a partnership piece of work. Clearly, all of the stuff that council does around learning, you're going to call in, and that's absolutely obviously within your remit. But the partnership, that partnership work, each of those groups, and there'll be a group for each one, we would expect to meet at least quarterly. There's an action plan being devised for each theme. And each of those leads will then meet with me as lead director and with Mez as co-sponsor to look at, well, are we on track? Are we doing what we said we would do? Is the pace there? Or have we got the right objectives? Anything we need to do to get unstuck? And then, we think this is going to be termly now, 3 times a year, is that we'll report into the reconstituted Children and Young People's board. The improvement is in this old slide we're going to drop. It used to be called the Children and Young People's Improvement Board when we were in special measures, but we're not in special measures, so we're going to take improvement out. It is just the Children and Young People's Board, and that's a multi-agency board that was running up until about a year ago. Clearly we had to look at what the PSB was doing to see actually what's the focus of work, and get permission to almost create that as a part of a subgroup for the PSB, which has been agreed. Then all of the work for children and young people, so not just 3 that Mez and I have got a particular responsibility for, but 3, 5 and 6 we'd expect to see outcome and impact information going through the Children and Young People's Board. And then they report into, that was another one, they report into the Public Service Board. So I think Appendix 1 in your pack gives you a list of the current people who sit on that particular board. That includes the leader, and that includes the chief exec, colleagues from, we want colleagues from health, police on there as well. FE is represented there too. So that's just the mechanics of how we think. We just need to make sure that we're reporting on this through the PSB. But obviously, members will call in anything they want at any particular time, and we welcome that. So the 4 key themes we think we need to really particularly focus in on. Early years, for me, that's, you know my background as a psychologist. I'm going to say early years every time is where we really need to focus a lot of our efforts, because we're already picking up youngsters as young as 2 and 3 who are demonstrating or showing signs of delay or showing signs of impact of ACEs, impacts of poverty, impacts of other adverse experiences that they've had, and that's starting to slow their access to social and emotional skills. That's going to have an impact then on their ability to access education, their readiness for school. That's going to impact on their health and well-being, etc. So early years, I think, is a critical area that we know we need to focus in on. Some of you already sit on the Early Years Development Childcare Partnership, the EYDCP, which at least one of you used to, I think, and that continues to be a statutory framework that continues. So that work goes on, and we also have work ongoing on the first 1,000 days pilot in Torvine that we might pick up in discussion as well. So, or we put it on there. So obviously the first 1,000 days pilot is ongoing. Flying Start, we know, is been ongoing. We've had discussions about that in the past, but those are in areas determined by Welsh Government. We're keen to look at how we can reach beyond those areas, because postcodes don't neatly describe where need is, although it's a handy way of giving out funding. So we know would want to see what else we can do. The Early Years Development Childcare Partnership I've mentioned is an ongoing statutory requirement, and we've initiated the childcare pilot, and I hope, if it's all right, Chair, we can give you some information on that at a subsequent meeting as a brief update, just in terms of uptake levels. But meeting with our partners in Blyndeg Grant, we're all really pleased with the initial uptake. It seems to be going quite well in Torvine. But we'll do that at maybe a subsequent meeting as a brief update. So some of the things questions we want to explore, I'm really keen to hear members' view on this, and again, if there are things that we've left out or you've got particular views, we really want to capture those. Should we tailor services to target resources to parents in greatest need? Now, there's a whole ethical dimension to this that I don't underestimate. Now, I don't want to take up the small amount of time we have with a long philosophical sort of discussion, but at the moment our services are provided to parents who want to take them up, and that's right and proper. But equally, we know, just from information available within Council and across partnership working, there are a number of families who are really struggling hard. And for maybe a variety of reasons, they don't feel able at the moment to access services, or sometimes are even a bit resistant to seeking those services out. So I think one of the questions we need to look at is, do we want families, is it ethical actually to let families struggle on and just about manage, just realised that's got a political connotation to it, but just about manage and struggle, or should we actively be going out and seeking them and saying, this is the support, this is what it could look like, and really try and be far more directed in what we do? Do we probably need a balance of both? What would that look like? We know that those families who are really not coping, particularly during the early years for their children, are often those families then who need even more support later on. And the pattern of difficulty that they've got into, the children might experience some delay, is much harder to shift later on. And that's not a good outcome for those individual children. It's not a good outcome necessarily for those families. But we're keen to explore that as an area. And that may have some ethical and political connotations to it. Do we to change the way we use Flying Start, sorry about that, Flying Start, we're changing the name as well, Flying Start, via discussion with the Welsh Government? We have some option there already. So the Freedom and Flexibilities initiative from Welsh Government, there are a number of pilot areas where we've got permission, in effect, of sorts, to look at 8 different grant streams and come up with a different way of looking at the flexibility within those grant terms and conditions to really maybe change the way we deliver services, but still meet the outcomes that Welsh Government want. So one of the things that I'm keen to do is to go back with colleagues like Dave Congreve and with Keith in social care, is to look at, well, can we now do that? That would mean more resource, be aware. It probably means a cut in the grant, because I think they're expecting some efficiencies. But it means we could use the current resources we have differently, which might mean different ways of deploying staff or changing the nature of work that staff do. But at the moment, we are not intervening in large chunks of Torvine where we know there is need because the grant conditions don't let us do it. So, There are lots of interventions going on across the borough as well, but there are some, like Flying Start, we can't. And of course, if Welsh Government say no, I don't think they will actually. But if they did say no, then we need to look at how do we make sure we've got the best use of the resources we have available to target the need that we have identified. And do we need to look at, does this theme need to generate a clear set of long-term outcome statements that sit under CP3? CP3, our corporate priority 3, I should say, raising educational attainment is quite broad brushstrokes in terms of its remit at the moment. That was that initial slide in red. Do we actually want to be a little bit more pointed in saying Council's going to set its mind to doing something over a longer period of time? Why mention that? To see the impact, if we change something this year for 2-year-olds, when realistically would we expect to see a change? Now, for you as the people who have to make the tough decisions in terms of funding, I know I want to be able to come to you and say, and this is the impact it's had, but we won't be able to do that necessarily within a single term that you might have, or within a 4 or 5 year period. So I think there's a discussion to be had about, if we're going to set objectives, we need to be realistic about how quickly we can see some impact. And I suppose that's where the wellbeing plan is setting 5, 10 and 15 year outcomes, because it's recognising some of that impact will take longer to achieve. So I think there's probably a discussion to be had about what we can achieve and how quickly we'll begin to see it. And that involves a bit of faith. And quite a bit of, but also quite a bit of, of evidence about what interventions actually have, some science behind them and say that this works. And we know that because they've been evaluated and they've been peer reviewed, and these actually are good interventions to look at. And there's a lot of things happening that don't necessarily have that evidence base at the moment. I was going to pause there for early years and just see if there's any thoughts or questions. Or
I can come in first. We talked about this at pre-agenda, and obviously, I think we all know that I would very much like to see this rolled out across Torfaen. But one of the concerns I had from talking this morning was that the lack of data sharing. So, for example, we talked about early years, the Flying Start needs, and they're not being tracked through the school, so we don't know what outcomes they're getting already. And my concern would be, obviously you talked about, the difficulty of getting those outcomes, seeing it there, but we haven't got a baseline. So, how do you see that going forward, and what efforts can we put in to make sure that, we're capturing that data?
Yeah, I think there's two bits to that. What you're describing there, Chair, I think is about what the future trajectory of the youngsters who've already had access to Flying Start and what the outcomes are. That I think we can achieve. And that's just a bit of work of identifying the cohort which we've got, and then looking at the data sets we have from each school, and then just marrying the two up. Now, we don't currently do that because it's not a requirement of anyone, but it is one of the things I think we need to look at to see, well, is it making that much of a difference? Really complicated to do that. The mechanics are easy, but making judgments about, just because you had Flying Start, does that necessarily mean we'd need several years worth of analysis and data to look at trends to see if overall that's more likely to give you a better outcome? Because there were so many compounding factors in the way. I wish I had an easy answer. But to do the mechanics of it, I think, is achievable, but we'll need to look at how we get the resource to carve that out. Did you?
Yeah, sorry, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I'm just running late. I was on report. I'm Mes Bolian, consultant in public health. I agree with everything Dermot has said. Really, the problem with Flying Start is it doesn't follow the cohort of the children through, so it's just cross-sectional. But one of the things that we could look at really is obviously we need to look at the feasibility of it. But if you were to be able to look at school readiness when children start school across and map that geographically, then actually we'd be able to measure actually for those children at age 4 or age 5, geographically, if they were then in Flying Start, what did that look like? Have they come up, to the standard you'd expect? And that way also, if not, you'd be able to use that data to look at actually these are perhaps the areas that we need to target actually in shaping services going forward. But there's lots of school readiness tools out there and difference, but there would need to be a dialogue around with education goals, feasibility, what would be a good measure, etc. So there are ways of doing it as well, which would be evidence-based, and there's quite a lot of tools around there as well, obviously, in terms of doing that, not relying purely on Flying Start data tracking through, because what we probably do know, whilst Flying Start programme is a fabulous programme, we actually can't be confident that perhaps the families who perhaps are in need are attending, and we also know there's great need outside Flying Start area. Need is not geographical based.
Yeah. I mean, I remember seeing an OECD. I remember seeing an OECD criticism of education in Wales. One of the things it said was basically they start a programme, they put a lot of money into it, they don't evaluate it properly. This sounds exactly to me that criticism is valid, because how much money have the Welsh Government put into Flying Start over the last, I don't know how many years? It's been going as long as I can remember, well, certainly as long as I've been in Torfaen, and we can't turn around now and say it's making a significant difference once these children are in school. And that seems to me to be ridiculous.
I mean, I'm not going to disagree or agree with you, Councillor Carey. What I'm going to say is the investment, I think, is really welcome, and there are opportunities to get it better. Now, the Freedom and Flexibilities initiative, pilot really, in effect, for us, gives us a potential bit of scope to look at, well, how do we make sure this is more robust, that it is more evidence-based, and that, the very point that you just raised, how can we look at the future impact that we can attribute to that intervention? That's really complicated because there's so many things happening in children and families' lives, but can we get better at looking at, did that, over time, give us a better outcome? So, yeah, I share your frustration, but equally I think practitioners will tell you, and families will tell you, that the impact that they have had in their individual stories has been significant, and I think there's a really strong support from the community, from those people who've experienced Flying Start, and from parents who are a bit frustrated that they live across the street and can't access it. So it's not perfect, but it's what we've got, and I think we can make it better. And that's really, I think, the purpose of why we want to talk about it here.
My apologies. The committee heard this morning that there were Flying Start projects in Thornhill, Pennygown, Trefethyn, Blenavon, and some streets in southwest Cwmbran. I just wondered, when these Flying Start areas are being planned, do you actually look at the population levels? Because I did an exercise a couple of years ago and looked at the population of southwest Cwmbran, and there were more people in southwest Cwmbran than there was from Griffiths down to Blenavon. And yet in Cwmbran, we've got a fantastic children's centre, but a couple of streets actually accessing Flying Start. Heard this morning that early years is mainly funded by grants. And how do we know that those grants are put in place at one time, and how is it following through that those services are actually following through on the service that is needed, the quality of need?
Welsh Government determine the geographic area, so if everyone's got that magic wand we've talked about in the past, and we can free it up, then great. But I think the flexibilities pilot will give us some scope to look at expanding it. That's what my ardent hope will be. That will be a decision for Council to look at, because obviously the funding comes through us, and at some point I would hope in the not too distant future, I think with the end of phase 1 of the pilot, this is something that Dave Congreve has taken the lead on, we'll be able to come back and say this is how we now plan to proceed. So I think that will be a Council decision, and what I'll be pushing for in that, which is to proceed that expansion. In terms of the grant funding, obviously within Council we've got a very clear performance management cycle for everything that's delivered by education, and that we regularly review and test. We are funding other partners through quite a sizable, so health visiting will be a sizable chunk. I think it's about £950-ish thousand pounds, and again that's a paper that comes to Council every year for approval. I think there are some real challenges for partners in ensuring recruiting, being blunt, and retaining experienced, skilled staff, and that's something that we take up with colleagues in health regularly about how is there anything that we can do to support them. One of the potential options around funding and flexibilities might be to look at the nature of the work that's being done through the whole of Flying Start, and at a point in time, and this isn't news, I'm not sort of breaking news to Mez here, that we're about to unfund anything, but we need to look at together what is the best intervention, who's best placed to do it. And I think that needs to be part of that discussion. So we've no intention at all of withdrawing funding from health visitings. That's a critical component of what we have in place and is part of the success of Flying Start. But equally, we've got some flexibility now to look at are there other staff that could support some of the work that's going on. We might have a mixed economy, but that's part of the planning that we need to do together. That's part of why it's in this theme, and look at, absolutely critically, and it comes back to Councillor Cameron's point, what does the evidence in the literature tell us works, and how can we build a really sustainable model based on that evidence.
Have we consulted with schools on this plan at all, and have they had any input into the sort of Flying Start and Sure Start side of it?
Well, because it's preschool, the schools themselves wouldn't be directly involved, but obviously it sits within the education service, and head teachers will be represented on the planning bodies, and we're just talking to heads about how that's going to be achieved. Clearly the early years sector are involved, whether they're maintained, which means we give them a grant, or they're non-maintained, and we have a very close working relationship with all of our providers, ever more so because of the new childcare offer. So we're making sure that they are fully involved, and that usually happens through the EYDCP, that Early Years Development Childcare Partnership, at which they're key partners.
A couple of gaps that we noticed within the plan was obviously there's an increasing number of homeschooling, children that are actually being homeschooled, and mental health with CAMHS. There's an enormous amount of issues coming up within schools now, primary schools as well as secondary schools, on the mental health of young people. I wonder what plans are in the plan to actually cope with that. That's enough for a minute.
I'll keep them coming. Well, we did ask for suggestions, so that's really welcome. Okay. Homeschooling, I think I've actually got the figures in front of me. I can read them. Well, a couple of things to say about this, because just so we're all talking about the same thing. If someone is home educated or homeschooled, that's where the parents elected to take their child out of the education system provided by the state, and they're entitled to home educate. I'm sure colleagues will be aware that all of the directors of education and all of the directors of social care in Wales wrote to Welsh Government collectively to say that we think there are significant safeguarding concerns about the absence of a formal register where parents are required to register their children, and there clearly have been a number of deaths associated with circumstances connected to home education that have raised real concerns that there may be a widespread issue. Not that everyone who's home educated is at risk, but there are concerns in place. So as the law stands at the moment, we don't have a register of who's home educated. Parents, if they want to withdraw the child from, and there's an important distinction when I raise that, I'll start in a different place. If you don't send your child to school in the first place, you don't have to tell us that you're not doing that. We'll get the live birth data from health. We'll know who we think should be in the area. We'll corroborate that with other sources like council tax that we might have if we've got a concern. If someone raises, a health visitor, for example, says, this child we think is going here, but they haven't shown up, we will follow that up. But parents don't have to tell us. Now, if they're in education, they then have to tell us that they do have the child, they're withdrawing their child. We don't have right to visit. We don't have right to ask what curriculum you're offering. We don't have right to check anything. We certainly don't have right of entry into the house to see the child. So in terms of what the local authority's responsibility is that we'll offer support if the parents choose to take it up. That usually means a pastoral visit, We'll talk to them about the curriculum offer that they're putting in place and see if there's any support we can give. That doesn't happen that often. So to put it in context, so the children that we know of, we do everything we can to try and find out who they are. 2013-14, there were 40 youngsters who were home educated. That went up to 52 the following year, 14-15. 15-16, it was 64, and it currently stands for the last full set of figures I've got, Councillor Seaborn, 2016-17 was 86. So that increase seems to be mirrored across Wales. It's not something that's particular to us. There'll be lots of explanations for that. I've no doubt that the unintended consequences that Steve Davis and Kirsty, the Cabinet Secretary, talked about in terms of some of the changes in education have led to some parents taking their children out to home educate them. That may be part of it. I don't know. As it stands at the moment, we're expecting some clarification from Welsh Government on its intentions around a potential register coming forward in the next few weeks, I've been told. I won't be content unless that's a requirement on parents in law to register. I have a horrible feeling there may be a requirement on local authorities to seek out these children. Now, I don't object to us having to do that, but that's a really difficult thing to do if someone doesn't want to tell you, because there are so many loopholes that could be there that there'll be some children we won't know about. So I wait to see. So in terms of our ability to support those children, I think I've said if the parents want support, we offer it. So anyone who's on elective home education, we write to them, we tell them what support's available, but they won't hook into the other systems that are available through schools. They still will assist, access clearly to all the health services and so on, but we're limited on that.
It was only just to ask a quick question on that, really. I know that we offer the support to children and families that are homeschooling, and we write to them. Is that an ongoing, proactive approach? So is it a yearly or annual or constant approach?
So we maintain our own register of those that we know about, and every term we write to them. It's not satisfactory. It's just not satisfactory. It feels uncomfortable.
I seriously think the comment should be put into the plan that, we've looked at the possibilities that could happen with the homeschooling, and it is a well-being plan for children, whether or not the parents say it is or not. We've got a responsibility to make sure that there is well-being out there. And who do they look at if the well-being goes wrong? It comes straight back to the social services and local authorities, so they don't always look at the parents. But, I think it should be written into the plan that we have concerns about the increasing numbers of homeschooling and where that is registered. So that's one point. My other point is CAMHS, the mental health.
Just on the last bit on the homeschooling bit, we have registered this formally directly with Welsh Government, so there's no mistake anywhere of the depth of concern that local authorities collectively feel. As I said, it was structured as social care and education, so we have absolutely, no one's getting any confusion about the concerns there. So I think that's loudly registered already. In terms of CAMHS, I don't know if we were both at a meeting only recently about some of this. Maz, do you want to talk to the CAMHS bit? And I'll come in because there's been a lot of work that's been happening.
Yes, Dermot said really there's it's probably quite an exciting time in terms of support for emotional and mental well-being for children and young people. In relation to access to CAMHS, but also you mentioned in terms of schools, as well. There's Welsh Government have announced some transformation funding, and through the Children's Board across Gwent, the members of the board, including Dermot, myself, Health Board and colleagues from all local authorities, have developed a proposal which basically turns CAMHS upside down, really. It's about looking at providing early support for children and young people within the setting they are in, so rather than actually a referral on to services, and not everybody can access service for CAMHS in St Cadoc's from, travelling access, you've got other families, but also it's about supporting frontline sort of staff. So that proposal, there's commitment for transformation of support for young people. CAMS will still obviously exist for children that need it, but actually this is about actually going early prevention and supporting children within the setting where they have relationships with individuals, because that's important as well, really, around emotional and mental well-being, the relationships they have with people within the setting, whether that's a school teacher or other settings, it might be youth workers, but actually providing them with sufficient support, and would be looking at deploying staff within to these services to support them, and where children need that higher access, that they access it sort of quicker as well. So that proposal is currently being sort of development. We are waiting to hear from Welsh Government. It's gone into Welsh Government. But I think there's appetite to look at things sort of differently, and also looking at earlier intervention as well, rather than waiting for when young people, hit crisis points sometimes, or adolescents. There'll be actually support across the sort of life course, starting very, very young. If you're a mother that's experiencing emotional and mental health sort of problems, it's important that they have support, because when the baby and toddlers are born, as well, the making support goes in to the family, and likewise right through the life course sort of thing. So we're waiting to hear on sort of funding, and but that's one for transformation, but also the Health Board had money as well for mental health specifically, to look at developing community hubs around primary care, and that's currently being progressed in partnership.
Just to add to that, I mean, health really change. There's been some really welcome change, I think, in terms of our collective ability to plan together. I think we've seen some really significant improvement over the last couple of years in particular, particularly around the regional partnership, which is a partnership with all the statutory agencies, as Mez said, and then there's a Children and Young People's Partnerships. Too many Children and Young People's Partnerships. I'm just thinking people will get confused. Yeah. So this is that multi-agency partnership across the region, and was it yesterday we were talking about? Just about resource coming from health into education services to support us to be released to do joint planning with health colleagues, potentially looking at maybe some educational psychology time going into to support work around multi-agency assessment for iScan and other initiatives. So really it feels like a very different space, and there's a real recognition now they need to work together, and as Mez said, try to get services to people where they are and where they need them, rather than coming to clinic-based settings, for example. So hopefully over the next couple of months we'll get some clarity. We're continuing to have planning meetings literally in the next few weeks about how this is going to be rolled out in anticipation of a successful outcome from Welsh Government.
Yeah, on that, I think on a Gwent level, if we get the funding through to that, Gwent would be probably leading the way across Wales on that, really. And the other pot of money which we have, which Torfaen is a pilot project for, is a programme called InReach, mental health support InReach within schools. And there's 3 pilot areas across Gwent, and Torfaen is one of those pilot areas, and that involves working with the schools to upskilling, responding to the training they need, and then InReach support to those schools. So Torfaen is a pilot for that, funding coming from Welsh Government for 2 years. But that's additional pot of money, isn't it? Yeah, which is really needed. Yeah.
Services will be starting, because there's a great need in the schools now for support and help, and we have instances of children not attending school because of their mental health issues. So it is really urgent. I just wondered what the timescale is. The Torfaen InReach project has commenced. The funding came through just after Christmas.
Is it InReach?
Yeah, InReach, mental health and emotion. InReach, IN, yeah, sorry. I've got a bit of a cold. I can talk today. Beginning of the week, I didn't, yeah. Yeah, so that pilot project has commenced. All schools have counselling support. They've also got school nurses who can provide emotional and mental wellbeing support. But the InReach project was specifically around upskilling, working with head teachers in that school environment to identify actually what support they need in terms of skills to deal with issues that they come across, and then that's commenced with training programs for that, and also the involves employment of 2 CAMS workers as well to then support the teachers, and they'll have a programme of how they provide that within schools, and they've recently arrived in post as well. So that project will be evaluated as part of a Welsh Government evaluation project. So that's another layer that's new within schools.
And then the other more extensive projects that we're hoping to get funding for, I think we're just waiting to hear at any point.
Yeah.
And then the plans are well advanced to try and get us up and running. So as soon as that's confirmed, I think then it's a recruitment process and getting people in as quickly as possible.
The training probably is the ACE awareness training, ACE's childhood experience. Edward's childhood experiences, ACE's training, that's currently being rolled out across Gwent as well, where every school cluster will have 2 well-being ambassadors, which will hold that well-being responsibility within schools, and a few things will come under that, like Healthy School Schemes, ACE awareness training, and that's a 3-year programme, and they're on rollout of ACE awareness training, which actually that's commenced as well. The first training happened in July, and they've been doing mopping up training currently. So there's quite a lot going on currently within schools that's developed in addition of the last sort of 8 to 9 months. Did you say that?
So you're telling us that every comprehensive school then in Torfaen has access to these services now?
Yes.
The rolling out, I think what would be useful, and it's one of the things we were talking about, is actually mapping this out, because we're hoping to get a launch sometime early in January. I'm trying to remember what we said now. Early in January, by which point we'll actually know all of the detail, what's been approved, what hasn't. And we were talking, I think we've actually got a date penciled in nominally to have a launch event so we can get the detail out to everybody and give you that provision map. We'll come on to provision maps and what we're doing in wellbeing in a minute. But to really sort of just try and give everybody, children themselves, young people, parents, families, this is what's available, this is what it looks like, and if you're in need, this is how you can access it. So the start of that is a date, I think, in the middle of January that we're aiming to go public and like, but not all of it's ready yet. So we're getting everything ready for that launch.
Yeah. The Enrich programme age group is targeted at comprehensive schools and Year 6, the last year in primary schools, and it's very much working with the stakeholders, the head teacher from Torfaen on the steering group to look at actually what those schools are needed really. Yeah. And we have started doing some mapping to look at what mental health support or activities are going on in schools as well.
And that's happening at the moment?
Yes, yes.
Bit naive, yeah? You know these pulling out of school, home learning?
Yeah.
Can anybody do that? I thought surely that if I ever left this day in school, somebody come looking for me. And another thing is, who's teaching it? Is it the parents or the teachers then? Or?
Okay. But, right, you have to withdraw formally, so you don't write to us and tell us that's it, I'm now going to home educate. I don't want to talk about this too much because I feel I don't want to encourage anyone to do it, because it's a really big ask. I mean, I don't think necessarily, and some parents are fantastic and their home education is superb, I have no doubt. I don't know for a fact because I'm not allowed to look at it, but I suspect that's the case. But it's a huge responsibility to take on, and I would, if anyone is watching this and is thinking about it, I'd say think carefully, because it's a huge responsibility to take on board. So as long as parents or carers write to us and say, I now want to home educate my child, that's really all they have to do. It's down to them then to secure appropriate educational provision for the child. And as I said earlier, we can't tell people what they should or shouldn't do at that point.
Who do they get qualifications in then? Do they go to school to take their exams?
Would have to register at an examination centre, and the person responsible for their education would need to make those arrangements. So in some instances they do talk to schools, and schools will include them on within their exam number basically, and they come along to the exams there. But that would be down to the parent to resolve.
So when they apply to you, do you try and talk them out of it, or just let it go?
We're not. allowed to talk people in or out of anything, of course. So what we do is obviously point out the nature of the responsibility, and we don't talk people out of it, but we leave them under no illusion as to the challenges that they will face, because people need to be able to make an informed decision. Sometimes parents have said, well, I'm really unhappy with that school, I'm really unhappy with this aspect of that provision, I want to home educate. We say, well, of course you can, but be aware this is what it would probably mean for you, and we try and make sure that they're as informed so they can make an informed decision.
Okay, thank you.
Well, the ALN bill, obviously there's a new ALN bill. I didn't see it included in any of the documentation. Have you taken account of the new ALN bill? What was the other one? Gone now. Sorry about that. Yeah, the mapping. I did have
two for one as well. You have another one on Rosanna. Okay. Obviously, we're the lead authority for the ALN transformation funding that's coming in. What this doesn't do, I should just go back to where I started. In pulling together these four themes, we're not trying to capture every single thing that we're doing for children and young people, because otherwise we'd end up with a document that is the size of this table, and nobody could actually use it, because there's lots of other things we're doing, and one of those is how we're actually supporting the whole region as the lead authority in the preparations for the ALN Act, which is coming in 2 years' time. So Tracy Peed, who used to be the head of pupil support, now is seconded. She now still works for us on a Welsh government-funded post as a regional transformation lead, and we have a grant of around £350,000 for the region to look at ensuring again that staff are aware of what's coming over the hill, now not very far away, what the implications of the new code of practice, which we expect to see out later this term, so we haven't got the up-to-date code, will be, and all schools are now completing, if they haven't already completed, their readiness survey, which was put together based on the ALN and Tribunal Act itself, and looking at as a self-evaluation for tools to plan on, are they ready. That then extrapolates to the local authority plan and extrapolates then to the regional plan. So that's all underway, in place, and more on that. I'm sure that is something that will come into the basket, and I think we talked about in the past. I think the key point around maybe the next time we need to talk about that will be early in the spring, because we're anticipating the code of practice, which gives you the detail of what you need to do. That's when we'll know. Big issues clearly for local authorities and colleagues in health, significant changes, and for social care will be around, is there actually now a new right to education to 25, even though that may not have been the policy intent. Of course it's cost neutral, as all good plans are, and for me, critically, how to make sure that children and young people and their families are at the heart of planning. And that's actually what we're trying to mirror in some of what we've put in front of you today, because that's at the heart of the new ALN Act, and how are we making sure our schools are ready for that? It's a big shift for some, not for others, but that work is well advanced, and Chair might be something that we look at in more detail. And ask Tracy Peed maybe to come along and give us an update at some point.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about the mapping of services and provisions, and the provisions we got available, and the launch of the InReach in January, and all really good things, really positive about the InReach. But I think either way that there are people that fall through the gap because they don't actually recognise that they have a need, or there is a need within the family, that there's almost an acceptance of that's the way it is. It's just the way it is, and I'm wondering whether these people, how we go about capturing those people within this.
I think that is bullet point one. It sort of goes across this, is that what we want to do is to make sure that all of the staff, the biggest resource we have are our staff in all of our settings at the moment. Specialist CAMs will never have enough staff to reach everyone who potentially might benefit from seeing someone. So we want to make sure I always use the analogy of dyslexia-friendly schools or autism-friendly schools. 10, 15, 20 years ago, people weren't particularly familiar with autism, for instance. And that's one of our biggest sort of areas where there's demand. And so it was very unusual, and those youngsters tended to go into specialist resources. They all tended to go to special schools and sometimes residential schools. Now, the same pupils these days are in mainstream, or they're in specialist units in mainstream, and that happened not because we just don't send them out of county anymore, because we invested significantly in ensuring initial teacher training and ongoing training for teachers, staff, governors, and for our colleagues was enriched over time to make schools more aware of what they can do and give people control back, because I think sometimes when they're faced with something new, it feels as if it's beyond, I don't know about this, and people get a bit anxious. So it's demystifying some of the concerns that people held, and we've been incredibly successful as a nation in looking at the inclusion of youngsters who 20 years ago when I started out as an EP were only in special schools and were unusual. Some people might say that's why we've got a higher identification rate as well, but all of our schools now are good at working with children with what used to be called complex needs, but now that's what we do. And in a sense, that's what we're looking to do with mental health. This is, go back in time, everybody's business. This is about actually giving people the toolkit that they need to be able to engage. And we'll see greater benefit there. But ultimately, we'll still have a group that we're going to have to think about, well, you don't want to engage. How do we get clever about wrapping services around you that you will be able to engage? Maybe not. This is where we get into that ethical dilemma, and I think that's the space we need to explore. There's a number of things we can do, but I think that it's going to take some exploration, and there are slightly different rules, as it were, around how health colleagues might be able to work, as opposed to colleagues in the third sector, as opposed to colleagues in the local authority, because of clinical governance arrangements and so on. So it's a bit complicated, but I think we need to ask that very question about all of the things we're looking at today.
Just a few things. The early years, the EYDCP, how does that actually operate? And it's really good to hear that there's some lovely new mental health-based projects coming out soon. Are they all going to be secondary based, or are we looking to put more into primary and get some early intervention in there?
Second one's easier to answer than the first one, probably. The answer is they're not just going to be secondary based. So there's a range of interventions looking at how we support youngsters and their families across the age range. It's not just secondary based. And I've just forgotten the first bit now. EYDCP. EYDCP came into existence about 20 years ago. As a requirement, came in across the UK. So it's a statutory body that is a partnership across all of the agencies in the local authority. It's got a particular focus on ensuring there's sufficient childcare. So a big piece of the work that you have to do is ensure there's a childcare sufficiency survey held regularly, so we've got sufficient childcare, and also that there's a family information service associated with that to make sure that parents and stakeholders have access to the information they need. So there's a formal constitution to it. As defined in statutory guidance, and that's been up and running, I think, consistently for the last 20 years. So it's ongoing, and I'm sure they're more than happy to throw open their doors and for people to come along and witness what happens. I'm sure there wouldn't be an issue, and I can arrange that if anyone would like to go and see what's happening.
Just looking at the early years, so we've got the first 1,000 days. What are we going to do with families? So, obviously siblings coming through, and it goes back to the data sharing really. Will we be looking to follow those families through, and get right to the early, or do we feel that, that work's been done, you've had one child go through, if there's perhaps not a big age difference, how would you envisage that working, given funding, etc.?
I think this takes us into that ethical issue again and we need to be careful about GDPR and just how we make sure we work with our families. But I think there's several bits here. One is I think we should be tracking those youngsters forward just to see, are we having evidence of impact? That's not something we're required to do. It's going to have to carve out a resource to do it. I think for education alone, That's fairly straightforward. It's just going to take some resource which we haven't identified yet. But we could do that. It get more complicated. We have to have a general protocol around all of the partners. So that bit I think we could probably achieve if we can find the resource to do it. Looking then at if you basically have 5 children and one of them's had an issue, rather than the discussion we need to have, I think, with those families is, oh, okay, are there other services you think you might need, and then go proactively to families, not to say we think you, because you've had one child with a difficulty, we don't want to say to parents, we think it's you really, or because you've had one, there must be an issue. It's just, right, you've been through a tough time, here are some other services that we think you might be able to use or might be of value to you. What do you think? And I think it's the question that came up earlier, do we keep going back and checking in on home tuition, is that we need to be a bit more proactive about saying to families, we're not saying you should do this, we're not saying you're not good or you require more work, but do you think these services might be of interest to you? I think we just need to be a bit more upfront with people. That will mean more demand, and then you have that balance with resources. Although we're having some new services come in, we're still going to be in a very stretched position to be able to meet all demand. So we need to have a debate through EYDCP, through the PSB about, well, how do we square all of that off? Because demand, let's be honest, looked after children population is still one of the highest in Wales. Our other county spend both in social care and education is very significant. How do we make sure that we're getting that preventative work and trying to catch people before they fall right, while still being able to maintain the services that we need for those most vulnerable people who are already in difficulty? So that's the perennial debate, and that's, I think, just what we're trying to flag up.
Is there any more specifically on the early years stream? And then with that, Dermot, move on, just thinking of time.
Does the Council ensure that we are compliant with the rights of the children and young persons measure, and how we hear a young person's voice within the Council and within its partners?
Cover that when we come, because there's a strand on it, and we'll cover it there, yeah? So,
Excuse me, please. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, we go on to the next one. So,
I know we've covered it, but it's also interlinked anyway. So
absolutely. They're all interlinked. I'll just throw the whole thing up in one go, apart from that little thing. So, Positive Pathways, again, is an existing group that was looked at primarily to focus in on the recommendation we had in our estimate inspection around needs. Because our performance around the numbers of youngsters at 16 becoming not an employment education or training was very significant. So that group's been up and running. It's got partners from all the key agencies, including obviously in this case the RSLs, Careers Wales, the police, community safety, schools, health colleagues, social care, etc. It was a really successful group. Well done them. Well done Karen Padfield and Dave Congreve. Phenomenal success. Really good. Our needs performance now is really, it's in the top. That's been in the top quartile. We've really got a good handle on that. That group looked at vulnerable youngsters who were potentially going to fall out of the system and therefore become potentially customers for CAMS, potentially as well as needs, potentially people who might then come into the social care system. So while it focused on needs, it also was a really good broad spectrum group that was looking at vulnerable learners, vulnerable young people. So that little change there is what we hope to make it into, is to say, look, rather than just focus on needs, that's working really well. We want to keep that plate spinning now. We want to broaden the focus of that group to look at anyone who's potentially vulnerable, because they've got a mental health issue, because they're homeless, because they're whatever it might be, and use that multi-agency group then to look at everyone beyond the early years all the way to 25. So sort of going to mirror what we're doing in early years. So we want to expand the role of that group. We need to negotiate that with partners to have a focus on children. I've said 25, but is it 16, statutory school age? Is it 19 when statements currently run out? Is it 25? Because actually it probably should be, because that's what the measure says. Different agencies might have a different view. We need to discuss that. should we expand the current risk indicator tool? Now, this is something I'm keen to look at, and comes back to some of the points that members have raised already about data. The Ronnie, I love our acronyms in Torvine. We love them. Ronnie was risk of needs indicator. I don't name these things, I hasten to add. I'm not keen on them, but refer to as a Ronnie. I just think of Ronnie Corbett. I don't know why it was always sticks in my head. Which was a collection of data looking at exclusions, attendance, and a number of other indicators of use of service, which we thought, if you've got 4 out of 5 of those, you're probably more likely to become needs. Now, we've got a lot of that data extending all the ways down into early years already. So families who don't attend Flying Start resources, even though they've been invited, maybe people who aren't attending for health visitors, but when they come into school, then we've got a range of data. So I want us to think about how do we use data to look at potential risk. Not to label children, that's really important, or to label families, but to give us a steer on, is there a pattern of need developing in this area? Obviously, we don't work around Glenavon as a partnership at the moment, but there's lots of other wards in the borough which might well have particular hotspots of need, and I think we can probably do some data work on that. So one of the things we want to look in this group, but really across the whole piece, is are we using the data we have intelligently enough yet to look at potential risk? Because then we should be using that to look at, well, where's our provision? Are the two things matching up? That could then become a much wider piece of work across the partnership. There was an attempt some years ago to look at the top 20 families in Torvine that were of concern to all the agencies and collect that together. I'm really keen we go back and revisit how we're making sure we're supporting those families and those individuals most at risk. And although there are concerns around sharing data, I've yet to read anyone's report saying that sharing concerns and sharing data and planning together is bad for people. It's usually criticised for not doing it. So there'll be a way through that, and we just need to make sure we find it. So that's one of the things when we look at how could and should we target this information be used. It's the same question again. Do we target? Do we have something generic? We're going to have to have both. For me, targeting of services in an era where we saw the settlement yesterday. I won't mention anything about health being well funded, but for local authorities, clearly we've got some big choices to make about where we commit the resources we've got remaining going forward. So some of the things that you currently as members would want to see us doing, and I would want to do, we won't be able to afford, being blunt. We're just not going to have the resource to do it. So there's going to have to be an element of making sure that we can target resources as effectively as we can. So that's an ongoing discussion, I think. And a big one for me is about evaluation of impact. We've got a huge range of interventions and work going on, funded by all sorts of different agencies, us included. But our culture of impact evaluation is not yet mature, I think, across the piece. So I think we do, it comes back to the theme, which I know that Public Health Wales will probably be happy with, is we need to look at the quality of the research and of the evaluation to determine whether or not some of what we're doing is simply providing people with a nice experience, or is it really changing what's not working for them in their lives, whatever the intervention is. So that's one of the things that gets cut. When you're under pressure, I think, we just need to do something. Do we want to spend time evaluating and funding it? And that's something that the local authorities at least have maybe shied away from or not put as much effort into. So I think there's a challenge for me as lead director and everything that I'm involved in to say, are we sure this is actually making a difference? So what? So that's vulnerable children. I think we've covered some of that bit. Okay, or questions, or move on?
I just want to say, I suppose, from my point of view, looking at those questions, and I think talked to Karen earlier that we really want to see a more preventative approach. So obviously we've got the needs, but if we are broadening out, I think the approach should be the younger end of that model, because we don't want to get to the stage where somebody is 25 and still looking at that, So I think that should be the focus I would want to see anyway. From.
I also think that we need exit strategies, because sometimes our families become reliant on who's supplying a service for them, and they don't think for themselves very often. And I think, the signposting bit and the exit strategy for any particular plan should be in place.
I agree with both of those. I mean, I think there's also a tendency, the people who work for us are fantastic. Guys, when I say that, we've got some really talented, committed, enthusiastic folks who put in more hours and energy and effort than they're paid for. With that said, there's a but here, isn't there? Sometimes I think one of the things that we need to get better at is understanding that we can't make everything better, and that sometimes we have to disengage. So being clear about exit strategies, I think, is really important, even though we may not always be able to resolve the issue for that individual or family. That's just the reality of our landscape. In terms of the data, I would want to look at risk factors for all age ranges and have that as part of a discussion about commissioning. Whenever a piece of funding comes in, be it something that comes to education or health or whatever, we're always coming back to an evidence base about, and this is why we should do what we're now proposing to do. That will be very challenging in some quarters, I suspect. In fact, we had a request for support through a health piece of funding the other day, and we applied that exact sort of script to it, and I suspect that didn't go down well when the message went back. But we have to. Resources are finite. We can't squander what we've got. We have to be confident as best we can. There's good evidence base, and it's going to have impact, and it's going to probably be time limited in some instances. So lots of thinking there, but evidence is critical. The wellbeing offer, because we're not able to connect to that machine, I wanted to show you where we're at with it. So, that didn't work. So, we obviously have a wellbeing outcome for council, where we said that we will now map initially all education services connected with wellbeing. So, wellbeing defined in a very loose sense, anything that promotes well-being of people, that's physical as well as emotional well-being across all services in education. But actually that's now expanded, and we've done that for everything across the partnership. We think are nearly all partners. So Mosaics is a bit of IT. It gives you your wards geographically on a map. You can click on the map and see all of the well-being services by age range for children and young people in the ward. How it's funded. Is it core funding? Is it transitory funding? Is it going to end in the next year? So we can look at that's what services are going to still be there, and that's what is at risk. And it looks at who provides it. And we've also captured the entrance criteria for that too. So what we're building up is a rich picture of, which we're going to sustain. We need to sustain this, so it's an ongoing map of what's currently available. We want the third sector to be part of that too, so that when we get into multi-agency discussions where a family presents, we're not just thinking about what's CAMS again, or it's Ed Sykes, or it's the school counselling service, or it's this team. Actually, we want to look at all of the services available that might be useful for that family. But better than that, or hopefully, one step before that, we want to put all of that information online for families themselves, so that people can find out what's available for them. They don't have to go through referral routes to GPs, or referral routes through psychology or CAMS, or whoever it's going to be. So it's a huge undertaking. We've got a working model now up and running. It's in a very early developmental stage, but it's there on the map, and you can click by ward. And we hope we'll do a members seminar, or find a way of actually sharing that with members in a live, hands-on sense before very long. Next step, overlay the need indicators with that. So point of origin of all LAC children, for instance, I'd be really interested. Where did those children originate? There are some assumptions. I think people feel that there are some particular wards that generate particular levels of need. I'm sure they're right. I just want to see the data. I just want to have it. And I want to see the attendance rates by schools. I want to see the exclusion rates. I want to see potentially health visitor uptake rates and GP visiting rates and so on. So we can look at a range then of a rich picture of where the need is presenting in the borough, and compare that as a partnership, and obviously for council individually as well, are we actually mapping our services onto that? Yeah. So the questions I put, I think I've covered there, Chair, in terms of what I've just said. So early days, huge piece of work. Jessica Everill's done a blinding job, and big thank you to all partners who've really given us the information. But again, I think it's a bit of a cultural shift for some colleagues. This isn't about not trusting people or looking over your shoulder like Big Brother. It's just you commission this, and other colleagues in other bodies are commissioning, and we need to join up our understanding and intelligence around what we've got, what's having impact again, ultimately, because that's the next ultimate step. If we want to commission services, match it with the need, match it with what's worked well, and then develop our commissioning strategy on that basis, as opposed to responding to a grant or an opportunity that may not necessarily be the right thing to do. So that's the intention of the stream.
To what extent have you been involved in the work of developing the children's plan? I know Public Health Wales has always been a very good partner, and maybe there's gaps other way. And the next question is, are there any gaps in our partners?
We've been fortunate really, there's good partnerships, across Torvine. So we've been quite heavily involved in developing the wellbeing plan, both in the assessment beforehand, and also informing, the priorities of the plan. And obviously, early years and first 1,000 days is something Public Health Wales and us in Public Health have been championing, across Wales. And the reason for that is that if we get it right, really, in early years, actually gives, children the best outcome. And also there was new evidence coming through around brain formation, etc., that actually made us realise actually that first 1,000 days is crucial, for setting up outcomes for children. If they achieve the development milestones by age 2, we know actually that sets them up, for the time they go to school in meeting outcomes and 2. But also we know if children are delayed, that actually can affect the life course really, and chances as well. So we have been sort of heavily involved, and fortunate really to be joint lead really with Dermot as well from education and early years as well. In terms of the plan, the wellbeing plan can't include everything. It's not designed to include what health do as core, what local authority does as core. It's what actually bringing partners to the table that we think actually by working on these together we can make a difference. And it's about developing really a shared outcomes framework across. If we can align the ducks or align the services to look at actually this is the outcome we want to achieve collectively, then we should see improvements. No doubt as well it is evolving the plan as well. It's sort of 5 years, but will be refreshed on an annual basis according to opportunities and need as well, because the mental health one is a recent development, isn't it, really built on good partnership and opportune really to make sure we try and get that right as well.
On my point, are there any gaps? Usually we've got a very, very good case of putting a plan together and doing things for people rather than them guiding us in what to do. Have you involved parents and children in the consultation?
Yeah, the consultation for the wellbeing plan was undertaken by the engagement team in the local authority. In terms of views of children, parents, young people, I think that's important, not just in development plan, but actually in development implementation of the plan as well. And that's one of the strands for participation that we're keen to strengthen. But also I can probably share with you around some of the first 1,000 days work. Some of that work has been involved in not just mapping the services, but actually looking at where we knew there were perhaps areas we could improve. In speech and language, for instance, we have commissioned research to talk to parents around what's good about the services. If they're not accessing them, why is that the case? And we've just had that report back now, which will be used as part of the group to inform services. So for me, it's crucial. We can't do things for people. We also need people to influence our services. And actually sometimes, we need to listen and also look at how that information can influence services so we can influence outcomes as well. So we're quite sort of keen on that in public health, and I will be championing that as well.
What about the rest of your partners?
Partners, well, I think if we implementing participation and engagement around the children's rights as part of this, I did present at the PSB and I did talk about the social insight work or research with parents, and it was something the Chief Exec also asked about, how we can make sure these come into services. On the social insights that we have commissioned, I am working with a lead in speech and language in the Health Board to look at how that can influence services, and she is committed to to doing that, because they also are aware that if they're providing the services, they want the best for engagement as well and attendance. But yes, but we'll keep at it. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's just like a really important piece of work. I said then. On this way, but in terms of avoiding duplication, obviously when we've got low amounts of funding, I wanted to ask you, Dermot, have you looked outside the borough for best practice examples on this? Are we working just with partners in Torvine, or are we looking wider? For this kind of thing, when you're looking online, what is available, if something's available in a neighbouring authority that might be, third sector, you might have access. Just some discussion around that.
I think looking at the provision beyond Torvine's borders is the next step. Obviously, all the partners we work with, nearly all the partners, the statutory partners, are Gwent-wide anyway, and the 5 authority footprint-wide. So they bring that perspective with them, that comes in. So I think when colleagues from health, for instance, are working with us in Torvine, they're conscious of all the resources that they have available just beyond our borders, and that's part of that discussion. I think there's more to be done around that. One of the things I'd say about partnership working is, I feel really lucky we've got a group of very enthusiastic partners who are keen just to solve problems and get everybody's lives a little bit better, and that's just a great atmosphere to work in. With that said, we can't guarantee how partners are going to respond, and there'll be issues occasionally that get in the way. So some places we're making really good progress, in other aspects of partnership working, maybe not associated with this plan, there are some stumbling blocks, but we're ever persistent and positive and keep going. Chair, so I've put on the participation one just to go through, and that's the last sort of theme, which just sort of fits in with what we've been talking about. These, just to really wind Rachel up, I'm trying to catch up with what I'm doing. So you're probably not going to read them, but these are the national standards for participation. So these are a set of standards that all public bodies really should be adhering to. They're in your pack, but again, we can get the link and ask colleagues to get you a copy of the standards. And it's about not just asking people what they think, it's about helping empower people to be involved in designing, creating, and exploring what needs to happen. Now, there are aspects of council at the moment, of services in council, who already adhere. So Youth and Play have already gone through, and there's an accreditation process in terms of getting accreditation that you're compliant. That involves children and young people coming around and testing you out to make sure that you've actually done it, and just seeing if you've got the evidence portfolio. I think I look forward to them coming to see me and giving me a good grilling. That must be interesting. So we've elected in education, for all of education, to get through those standards and hopefully be ready for accreditation at the end of the academic year. The intention then is that's a bit of a test bed to see how a whole service area might be able to adhere. We'd want to share that then as a model, not necessarily of best practice, it might be of things to avoid, I don't know, but I'm hopeful it'll be of good practice, and share that out across the whole partnership to then see if we can get buy-in. Critical to that for me is also building on the really good representative groups we already have within the borough. Some excellent work happening. But is it coordinated and joined up enough? So one of the things I've been really keen to do, and talk to the Chief Exec and the leader about, and obviously work with Rhiannon Bennett on, is how do we now make those connections. So I'm really keen to see the establishment of the Children and Young People's Parliament for the borough, building on those strengths we already have. So we don't want to lose anybody's voice in this, but equally we need to make sure it's fair. As a group of politicians, you'll know, we don't want to give someone 2 votes on all of the issue about if you have a parliament. It's got to be democratic and absolutely above board. So we want to go out to children and young people and say, well, what do you think that could look like? The obvious model is to build it on school councils, maybe as a lower house. Then there's a range of other representative groups. Actually, the RSLs have their own youth fora. Some community councils have their own youth groups as well. There may be other groups used in, the RSLs have mentioned, maybe in aspects of health and so on. So what we want to do is have a single representative network where we can look to really devise new policy going forward in collaboration with that Parliament. And to hear what they've got to say and ask them what they think we should be devising policy on and be accountable to them. That's going to be an interesting discussion, because obviously you've got accountability because you're elected by the electorate, but equally the national participation standards would say we should really be thinking about, our children and young people, and don't they ever say, even though they don't have a vote yet? There's another debate to have. So we're keen to get into that space and explore it. It will also, selfishly, potentially as well, for all of the partnership, not just for council, provide a very, hopefully well supported forum to take ideas to seek assurance that we're on the right track, to really hook in some thinking and ideas about where we might want to go next. In a way, at the moment, it is really quite difficult because of, we talk about education, or we talk about social care, we talk about health. They're massive organisations, and every aspect of what they're doing might need to have some input from. So we just want to see if we can have a single, unified way of getting that collective view, not to stop other people's voices or in any way rule anyone out. There's some amazing work going on. I don't want to say to any child or young person, well, no thanks anymore. I want to see how we actually include your voice, and particularly make sure that underrepresented sections of children and young people are really properly represented, be that based on gender, be that based on our biggest ethnic group is going to be Gypsy travelling population. Are we really sure we've been as consultative with that population as we could have been, could be? I think we do well, there's probably more, and a whole range of other aspects of our population that maybe find it difficult to participate. So people with learning difficulties, people with other additional needs, are they as included because of the means in which we choose to run consultation? So, and involvement. So that's what we want to do in terms of the Children and Young People's Parliament. And as I said, then the National Participation Standards. So that's the two key bits of what we want to get on with and explore. And obviously come back to this group and council and partners with how we can develop that thinking. It'll have a little resource implication, as you would imagine, and I'm sure the local democracy unit are already thinking, well, you've moved, thinking about how they're going to support us with that, and I'll be talking to them about the team planning imminently. But yeah, I mean, I think there's something we could achieve quite quickly, and actually it would be really powerful.
Sorry. Just on that point of finance, I'll collect, but I understand we have a sustainability grant from the EU until 2022, and I wondered whether or not you were looking into accommodating that. Do we all know the big picture? Is everybody joined up? That's the issue, isn't it?
No, they're not. So that's sort of the point you're making, is that's why I think we need to look at this. Funding is going to be critical. If we're going to do this, I think we should do it properly. I think we should resource it as a partnership, not just as council. So it'll be something I'll be wanting to take back into the PSB inside. We're not talking about a huge amount of resource, but we don't want young people not to be able to attend because they can't get transport. That'll be one of the critical issues. We need to remove barriers to people's participation because they're doing a sort of public service. They might be 9, but they're doing a public service, and we need to support them. So I think we have a lot of thinking to do about what the model would look like, and then how do we make sure it's effective. But I think it's really important we get that right.
You may have answered my question, but my question was about a lower house, and how do we engage our primary children in this as well, and to make sure that it is inclusive, that all children are supported and are able to, to travel and to attend. I just wondered, I think you did cover that.
There are a number of different models that we could look at. Caerphilly have got a really well established process in place. And we want to learn from that, and we'll learn from other models if they're available. Clearly there's also going to be a National Youth Parliament for Wales, so we want to see what the relationship between our local Parliament and that could be. So at this point, we haven't determined the model, and actually given what we're trying to do, we shouldn't. We should go out to children and young people and say, here are some particular potential options that exist elsewhere, what do we think? But yeah, there has to be inclusive representation, and there are lots of different ways we could do that. A lower house could look like primary, secondary. There are different models we can look at. I'm inclined, I think there are models available where we could look at a single age range within that Children and Young People's Parliament as the level of support we give, facilitation, that can make that work. Because there are, as I say, there are a number of standing groups, that might act as the upper house, the unelected house. See, we didn't do all that loveliness about, because obviously your tenure in the Parliament should be time limited. And there should be elections, and it should be properly representative, not who's always gone along. But we don't want to sort of say to people, you've been a big contribution so long now. But equally, if you're a member of a youth forum, there's a natural end to that because you've got a time out of it. So there'll be ways, I think, for us to look at. Should we value what we currently have in terms of the richness of contributions from children and young people, and make sure that everybody's voice is equally heard? It can't be a secondary young people's forum, because that takes away from the first strand, early years. How do we make sure we capture the views of very young children? And there are tools available. Schools have to do this already about what's the views of your pupil voice in key stage 1, as it was foundation phase, for very young children. But I'd want to build on that, because why wouldn't we?
I'm really interested in the Youth Parliament idea. I think it's a really good idea to have lower and upper house. How are we planning on engaging 18 to 25-year-olds who should obviously be involved in this process and who are no longer in education as such? How are we planning on getting them involved in this Youth Parliament?
I think there's a lot of work to do around that. Not to forget, though, by the time that we bring this into being, we will have a post-16 facility in Tornvine, which will give us a good basis to cover off some of that age range. Then there's going to be links with other organisations, particularly in the third sector, to look at, well, how do we try and get as pervasive an offer available and capture as many people as we can. But that's where some of the expense is going to come in. We have to get the message out there. We have to make sure it's meaningful and it's attractive, and that it's going to make a difference. Because I think whether you're 6 or 7 or you're 25, it won't take you long to figure out if you think the thing's not going to give you anything back. I think young children are probably better at that, and the easier it is for you to call a bluff when you see one. So I think that meaningfulness is critical, and if we can demonstrate we're really serious about, look, this is actually going to help shape what happens in your life and in the life of the borough, and maybe further afield, I think that will pull people in. But there's a lot of work to do to try and establish what that could look like.
Just to follow on from that, we heard earlier on today that you have Rhiannon, who is the Youth Participation Officer, who kind of works on her own. What sort of size of team would you be looking at to facilitate engaging every youth into a vine, or trying to engage every youth into a vine, and formulate this Parliament? Because I'm sure it's going to be too much work for just one person.
It's everybody's responsibility. So going back to, that's why the national standards fit with this item. They're absolutely connected. It's a responsibility of everyone who works in local government to think about how they're adhering to the national standards on participation. So this is one of those issues about, it isn't just Rhiannon, God love her, because nobody's got that's the magic wand again, who's going to do all that work? And it isn't just me, it's actually how do we inculcate this as a culture within the whole organisation, and everyone recognises, right, when I sit to think, well, I can't sit and write team plan the way I used to. Actually, what is the process I go through to ensure I'm informed about what I should be writing in my team plan? And that isn't just talking to your colleagues in your team, it's about actually starting with, well, what did the Youth Parliament actually tell me last time when I was there? I would expect to see officers going regularly. I'd expect them to have their own scrutiny, potentially. It'd be an interesting one. They might invite Cabinet in, who knows? So it should be a functioning Parliament. So the resource implication is significant, but it should be a responsibility of everyone. But I will be going back to PSB in due course and saying, if we're really serious, if we want to make this work, this is what it's going to require. Now, there are resources in all of our organisations already that have got something like this attached to to their responsibilities. It's about saying, here's a model, this is what we think it'll take. How do we now make this happen? It would be a failure, I think, of our partnership if it was just the council that sponsored it, or Just Health, or just anyone else. So, it's a little test for us as a partnership. If we're serious, let's get on with it. PSB, when we put this to them, absolutely no dissent. Okay.
2 questions, if I could. When can we expect to see a plan? And have you got any ideas what you're going to stick in it for measurement? I'm thinking things like reduction in teenage pregnancies, increased number of children going to university, increased number of carers going to university. Have you got any ideas of what you're going to stick in there as measurements?
Those measurements already exist in people's individual team plans. So this is not a collection of what everybody's got in their plans already. These were the themes that we identified, I think, at this point in the PSB's lifetime, about things we should be doing to enable further progress for everybody across the whole system. So the outcome measures that we've got at the moment are all process outcomes, which I'm sure is where you're going with this, because they're talking about we need to establish new ways of working that will facilitate those more demonstrable numeric outcomes in due course. These are taking away some of the barriers to us working effectively. So at this point, in this part of its lifetime, I'm not expecting to see those sorts of outcome measures in the plan. The plan fits with our planning cycle as a council, and that's what we've agreed with partners in each of the themes, is that as people are now writing the team plans in council, people are also looking at this, if they sit in health or wherever else they might sit, as part of their planning process. So we're anticipating we'll get to a plan, which will have 4 themes in it, by Christmas, and then we'll start reviewing the implementation of that plan a term after that. Now, there will be some discrete indicators that all exist within the EYDCP that already exist within some of the components of work within the Vulnerable Children's Group, and they'll get reported on, but that will be part of the normal planning cycle.
I wanted to ask a general one. Like, how are we future-proofing this? So obviously we're looking at 5-10 years. But obviously a lot of these grants maybe falling by the wayside to do different streams of work. So just what thought has gone into that?
Now therein lies a really interesting question. As you know, councillors, I don't set the budget. I only get to use what you give me, or what central government gives us. I think what we're trying to do is to look at a cultural shift, and to look at, and it goes back to what Mez was talking about in terms of the development of a much richer partnership, working arrangement and landscape that we've started to create together over the last couple of years in particular. That's probably the best insulation we have from some of the vagaries of funding that are going to come along, where people are actually starting to look at how do we collectively get best outcomes for children, as opposed to what does my plan say. And that's where we'll get the efficiencies, and that's what the Future of Wellbeing Generation Act is, if I can say it properly, is all about, is how do we actually work in a different way. So what we're trying to do in this piece of work isn't get caught up on absolutely who said they're going to do this, that, when. It's about how do we get enabling cultural shift across our partnership. So that's why we think early years, looking at how we use data differently, how we look at need, and then think together about how we meet that need is a bit different. That's a significant shift. Well-being, again, is looking at data and mapping as what we currently have, and then using that in a different way. Participation is obviously responding to the participation standards, but it's also about culturally shifting us in our thinking from what do I do as an officer with this grant, what do I say to you as members I'm going to do, to what the children and young people and our stakeholders in the community need, and hearing their voice about what they think we should do. So that's what this is about, and it's a bit different therefore. We still have all the existing plans for all the individual services. This, if you like, is a sort of layer on top about how do we try and bring some of that work together, and as Mez said, work on things that we can only solve together.
Can I just look at the membership of the CYPIB? Obviously, it does involve children and education, but there's no mention of the cabinet members for children or education. I just wondered whether it's something you are thinking of, or...
We think of lots of things. This was the existing membership as of when it was last constituted. So one of the things that, and again, that's part of the reason for including it here, I think there'll be there were 3 executive members who I would think portfolio overlaps with this work. So Councillor Ewell, Councillor Owen, and yourself, Chair. About less anyone else, Councillor Clark, who might well fit in. So it's about, I think one of the things we wanted to do originally in the constitution of the membership, and the reason why having the leader there is important to this, was that we didn't want it to just be a council-led membership, because it's a subgroup. It is now, but it wasn't back then, but it is now a subgroup, if you like, the PSB. So there were some bits missing here for me in terms of, representation from the police and maybe from other agencies that we want to augment. So I think it's up for grabs. But what I wouldn't think would be particularly helpful is if it's dominated by council, because I think colleagues then in other partnerships might be confused as to what its function is.
So I was going to ask the same thing to Lev, actually. I just, as we're coming to the end, I just wondered how the whole thing is going to be publicised, communicated, shared.
I think the first thing to do is to get our plans together, and obviously today's part of making sure we've got an informed process to get to that point. It's an entity that sits now under the PSB, so it's something we'll have to talk to the PSSU about how do we make sure that it's got a presence. I think the critical bit for me isn't so much about having a brand for it or having a logo and all that stuff. It's about making sure that we drive the activity that we've all signed up to, and that we get into that cultural sort of shift and that behaviour shift in what we're trying to achieve. So the critical bit for me is to make sure that that is up running quickly as possible. We're reporting into the PSB as quickly as possible, so I anticipate that will be in the first quarter in the new year. So the plans have to be up and running for some time. And then the key bit for me will be around how we can get on as quickly as possible with the Children and Young People's Participation work and the Children and Young People's Parliament. And I think if we're going to publicise anything and really go to town in terms of comms, that will be the focus. All the other work is what we're supposed to be doing and getting on with anyway, so we'll get on and do that, and obviously regularly then feedback. As I said, it was important to put in the governance sort of line. There's always a line back to this overview and scrutiny committee, because that was written obviously for the PSB. So that's clear now, so obviously at any point if you want an update on any aspect, then I'll expect to be able to answer that for you. So we'll be having termly reviews of progress towards. So at any point we'll never be more than 3 months out of knowing where we are at any one time, which puts us in a nice sort of cycle.
Individually, I mean, you've both put a lot of work into this plan. Do you foresee any gaps, or are there any gaps that you wish you could have put something in place?
How much have you got? There's lots of things we could do with more resource. Realistically, what we're trying to do here is build on what a lot of other people have done. I mean, all the real work's happening from the people who are leading on each of those individual areas. If we had more resource, we could do more, but realistically, that's where we are. Are there significant gaps? I don't think so, but part of the thing, the reason for bringing it here and going to the PSB, but going out to all partners is, this is, as Maz said, a moving picture. We need to be responsive and flexible. There are going to be challenges to us that we just can't anticipate at the moment, and maybe some opportunities. So we'll absolutely be flexible. That's critical going forward, to make sure we maximise anything that comes along. Sorry.
Yeah, so just to echo really is children and young people. You could pick any angle really, and I think For me, I'm really pleased that early years is featuring quite heavily in that report, and also the, strengthening the engagement and participation of young people, because what that will give us really is actually what are the real issues that young people want us to focusing on, and that will help the shaping it going forward, sort of thing. So they are strategic wide in terms of systems approach, really. The early years is about the system and involving the partners, and then by getting the participation and engagement right, that will help them shape, going forward, what the real issues for young people are. They think that want them blocking and sorting, really.
Yeah, you've used the word resources quite a lot, particularly in the last couple of minutes. I mean, it strikes me that there's an awful lot of good work going on there at the moment, but in some areas there's a lack of capacity. There's an awful lot of interventions, but in some areas there's a lack of coordination and perhaps evaluation. So basically, I think that one of the issues I think that's going to need to be in this plan, because of the lack of resources, is targeting. So I think, the main issue going forward is resources are not going to get any bigger. So we need to get to know our target audience a lot better, and we need to target what little money we've got and ensure it's in exactly the right place.
I think that's obviously why we pose that as a central sort of theme going through the, each of the strands of work. And we'll need to come back to you as council, with that hat on, come back to the PSB about, you're the commissioners ultimately. Have we got it right in terms of that targeting, if that's where we need to go? Because it's not for us as officers to make those decisions. It's going to be, we'll give you advice, but ultimately that'll be decisions for the commissioners. And I think invariably that's in some instances where we're going to get to. Clearly we've all got statutory responsibilities to provide generic services in some instances, but there are things that we currently provide that we don't statutorily have to provide. I don't think we've got many things we do just frivolously. I think we do them all for good reasons, but some of that will have to change and stop, or be redirected, or its nature is going to have to shift, and we'll have to come back to you with those proposals, or else to find other resources to make those things happen. So there are always choices. I think you're right, there's lots of things happening. So the gap for me, just to answer this quickly, and it sort of goes into the piece of work that we've been engaged in for some time, is my ultimate goal would be, if I'm a parent or I'm a child in Torvine and I'm self-aware and I've got an issue that I'm really conscious I need some help with, I'll easily be able to go online or go to talk to someone who will tell me all of the routes of my care pathway, of what might be available, who might be able to provide it. Not that I'm going to get it, not that I've got an entry ticket to get into any, but I just have clarity about actually what is available, what can I do now, in a way that's really easily accessible. And at the moment that information generally is there, but I'm not sure if I'm sat as a child or as a parent, I know how to access that, and I have it in a joined up way. So I think for me there's a bit of a test as well, partnership working. Some of the things when I do with a single front door in terms of health and social care is to make that as clear as you possibly can. I think that'll be a really good outcome measure again. Not something we can just say there's a percentage there, but something that we know will actually help reduce some of the concern that exists already.
What the interventions we're doing, and some of the issues around little things like the school forum. A number of years ago I had involvement with the school forum, and you found that the more capable children were the ones that were on the school forum. The thing that concerns me is that it is the more capable parent that is picking up a lot of what we provide, and as well as those development areas where it's easier to find where you can get your help. I think there has to be a certain amount of outreach, because there are some parents who, if you tattoo it on the inside of their eyelids, would still not be able to have that confidence and that, dynamism to go ahead and do it anyway.
And I don't disagree with that, and I think we need to learn a new language professionally about, because someone doesn't access it immediately, or they don't attend, that doesn't mean they don't need the service, or they don't really need it, maybe more than the people who do attend, which is your point. So what do we do about it? No, what we can't, I think the challenge for us collectively is that's a good way of, if someone doesn't attend, that's a good way of managing a waiting list potentially for some services. The need just comes up somewhere else. It usually ends up being more costly for the individual and more costly in pounds and pence as well, but primarily more costly for the individual in terms of the life outcomes they may have as a result. So I think we've culturally again need to think together as a partnership about, is that okay? And actually why are we here in the first place is to deliver best quality services in the most timely way we can, even sometimes if people say they don't want them. So we need to learn or explore how we can still persist in offering and finding other creative ways of probably taking the anxiety out of accepting help that some parents, some families, some individuals experience. Because I think more often than not people really want the help, but they feel they can't have it in the way it's offered. So that's a challenge to us to think about, well, how differently do we offer the help?
And on Colette's point about the membership of the Children and Young People Partnership, I was one of the original members of the actual Children's Partnership when it was introduced many years ago. It seems very educationally orientated in the feedback. Previously we had the police involved, youth offending team, etc. There seems to be quite a few gaps within the reporting mechanism in the proposed reporting structures, and how do you propose to go further than what you've got in the structure?
Sorry, Chair. What you've got at the moment is the first iteration based on who's been engaging, so we know we've got gaps. So this is just a starter for 10 to get up and running. We really do want to have a complete set of representation in each of the groups. So in terms of early years, we would expect it probably will be colleagues from health and education who are leading the first 1,000 days anyway, who are going to take a lead on that. In terms of the wellbeing offer, because that's primarily based within council to start with, it'll start with us, but I'll be happy to hand that on to someone else as soon as we get that up and running. So because that's a bit of creative work, we're just getting on with it, that probably will be us to start with. In terms of the educational learning opportunities, that sort of vulnerable children's group, I think that's up for grabs. That's a piece of work that when I'm looking at, I would really be keen that there isn't someone in education who does that. So that's to be determined. It's just where it sits at the moment. And then in terms of participation and engagement, ideally children and young people themselves leading on that as we get into it. So actually that might well be a role for, there might be an apprenticeship in that, there might be some other opportunity for a young person to actually take a lead in that with support. But again, we're at the right beginning of seeing how we can actually get this up and running. So honestly, nothing's set in stone, and the whole theme, I hope, of what we've been talking about is how do we grow partnership? How does it become more than just council officers, talking about absolutely the heart of what we want to get to. And as I say, good sign up from PSB. Critically, the Children and People's Partnership isn't just looking at Objective 3 now, it's looking at Objective 3, 5 and 6. So again, leads on those themes are from Mellon and Brunavon and the fire service?
Yes.
And police. So, I anticipate that will start to develop. It's just that's where we are at the moment.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just wanted to comment around the participation, really, because that was a massive piece of work. I know it sounds like, we'll just get some kids in and they'll just chat. There was a huge piece of work to get that set up, especially as we're not looking at just school councils. It's over. And obviously we want to give you all the support we can with that, and all the encouragement and everything. But I'm just concerned that is huge, and it could take a lot, quite a while to get it set up properly. So we're just talking about timescales. When do you envisage, getting those early meetings in for that?
You're right, it is massive. So in Caerphilly there are 4 people involved in actually facilitating all of that work. So the key here isn't that we set up the Parliament by the end of this year and it's up and running. The key here is that we've got complete partnership buy-in to ensure that the Parliament can be successful, and we have a model that we've consulted with children and young people on about what that would need to look like. So for me, the outcome for year 1 is to get everyone in the same place that you as a committee seem to be about. This is a great idea, but how do we make it happen? With a model on the table to say, okay, so let's look at, well, what would that mean? Realistically, setting up any parliament, doing any election is not exactly a straightforward piece of work. So I think the commitment to do it and the commitment to ensure that it works is what I'm after in year 1, with a model that's going to, we think is going to be effective, with children and young people heavily involved in driving that. So we're not going to have a parliament, I'm afraid, I think, a year from today. However, go back to Councillor Cowan's point about resources. If the resources were made available, we could accelerate that process. But this is a partnership piece of work. It can't be something that just Torvine or a single partner does. Otherwise, it isn't owned by the whole partnership, and that's, I think, really critical. And I'm making a huge assumption in this that children and young people will want one. I suspect they will, but they might turn around and go, no thanks, which is a possible outcome too.
To point on how long this plan is envisaged to be in place, when the evaluation of the plan is going to take place, and when do you start working the next one?
There isn't a plan. We've covered this. I think there is an ongoing process of how do we respond to the requirements in terms of the requirements in terms of what's in the PSB and actually in council as well, and our interpretation of Corporate Plan 3 and what we want to see written in. There was a challenge in there in early years about do we want to be more specific in terms of what we as a council commit to that we'll do. So I think this will evolve, and it will evolve for all the reasons that we've covered. It has to be compliant with what's in Objective 3, and there are some specific outcomes there which are already well underway. So I think it's an evolving picture. I think for me this is about how do we make sure that all of the work we're doing for children and young people is coordinated as effective as it can be. That cannot be a directory of everything that we do. It has to be, have we picked out the key bits, the key themes of work that we think will get us a greater join-up to get better outcomes. So to answer it, the plan for this, I'm anticipating we should have ready by Christmas, at least have the first iteration to share back and take that back into the PSB and make sure that they're happy with it, and obviously here if needs be, not if needs be, if you want it to come in here. And then that will be subject to a termly review along the governance sort of structure that we've put in the plan, and it'll evolve. It needs to be flexible, but what we want to do is have a longitudinal impact. So we want to make sure that what we start, what we commit to, also is embedded over time. And again, there's a challenge back to us as council, I think, about if we're only commit to some of the things in early years, we're going to have to be mindful of we won't see complete impact for 4 or 5 years, which might go beyond the term of the election sort of process. So there are some challenges there, and we'll keep bringing back information and progress, as I say, on a termly basis, and we'll welcome scrutiny as we go through.
Thank you very much for coming, and you're free to go. Okay, so we're invited to review and comment on the revisions to the reporting structure and reporting timetable for the CYPB and its associated subgroups. Consider the suggested next steps, further actions for each of the 4 work streams, which was outlined in the presentation, and then make recommendations to the Chief Officer and Exec Member, setting out priorities for inclusion in those detailed plans. So, I mean, just open it up, does anybody have any particular recommendation they want to make? Glenn's face then.
Well, I mean, just to say really, just to say really, I mean, there are no detailed plans, so it's difficult to have to say, I'd like to see this in detailed plans, because it could well be in there, for all we know. I haven't found this a particularly effective scrutiny, if I'm honest. I think just picking a bit out the PSB and the well-being plan and saying, well, look, this is what we're working towards. Well, I can understand that, and maybe that was a basis for what should follow. But without anything to follow, I find it really difficult to suggest any inclusions in a plan where I can't see a plan.
Anyone else?
I think the proposed new reporting structure is too narrow. I think it needs to widen. They could learn from previous children and young people's plans if they just picked them up and read them, because the partnership involvement in that, youth offending team and all sorts of areas. So the reporting structure, I think it needs also to say how it's reporting. It says here, and it's very educational orientated, and they report into the Children and Young People's Performance Review Group. It doesn't have any feedback coming backwards. We need to know how we're disseminating that information, and the list of officers on this page doesn't even include the Public Health Wales, who was reporting on it and had been involved in it and everything. So there's the report is a bit woolly, I think.
Yeah, I was going to pick up on the membership of the CYPB board as well. I know Tim touched on it to say that there is room for change there, but I think that's the current structure, and that can change. But I think it needs to be wider in terms of partnership, police, fire service, Careers Wales. I think all those people need representation without making it so big that you can't get anything done.
Yeah. I think mine were that I picked up on a particular thing around the homeschooling issue. I get that we can't direct or anything, but in particular we're setting up a youth forum where we need to contact those children who are not going to get access in school, things like that we need to have it in mind at all times, that we can't just be looking at schools for this. And also, again, with youth participation, I think, as a general recommendation, I think we're going to need a lot of strategic direction from the top, because that is a huge piece of work to get that set up.
I think this would have been far better going to the cross-cutting scrutiny committee, or at least calling in social services as part of the plan, because I mean, when you look at it, if you look at this objective 3, one of the things in there is childhood obesity. That's not a small issue. I mean, I know in some schools it is, and yeah, they do healthy eating and all this sort of stuff. But I mean, there's a lot in here about increasing the access to green space, and I mean, I'm picking out stuff that's in objective 3 of the, which is why I don't think what we've had has been particularly all that helpful, because it hasn't covered. Yeah, to just bring it to learning has not been, it's been too...
Sorry, Jane. In a previous life, they had everybody involved in a young person's life, from a midwife to a health visitor, but it wasn't everybody, it was just what was important to each of those groups, and we seem to be going top down instead of bottom up. I think we need to start bottom up to listen to the people's views out there and what their needs are, and then go from there, rather than do unto people as we would say.
So do you want a specific recommendation around just partnerships where stakeholders getting involved, and that they need to look much wider?
Yeah. They can learn from previous.
Is there anything else specifically that anyone has got?
I'd like to hear young people's views on the plan as a whole, and the idea of a youth parliament. It's all about them. So let's see what they got to say about it, and if they agree with it or not. Before we go ahead with anything, their opinions need to be taken into account.
Forwarding, I haven't really picked up anything that members haven't just discussed. Other than, obviously, you've got feedback all those concerns that you have just raised. But how would you like to take that forward now? Obviously, they said the plan will be developed. Is that something that you will want brought back to scrutiny before? Obviously, you've got items in your basket ready for the year ahead, but do you deem this important enough that you would want some citing of it, or?
Given Glyn's suggestion, obviously, Crosscutton's got their own basket, but maybe we could ask that they do that as a seminar and give everybody the opportunity to come into it as reporting, rather than it come into us specifically, because we've kind of done what we can, really, I suppose,
Yeah, but you look at. We may not talk about it as targets, but they say that their previous plan has had success because of, increased number of children going to university, things that I've pushed towards. Yeah, and a decrease in teenage pregnancies. Only one of those has got anything to do with education, really, isn't it? I know that sex education is now taking place in schools, but I think they're throwing a lot at schools, and I think quite a bit needs to be done through other areas. So I think it would be best if we had at least
look at an alternative way of bringing the plan back to an alternative form.
So I think that's the whole point, really. The whole idea of this plan is that it can't just be schools; it must be every strand of the council, every strand of every organisation. And I think, if we could have an all-member thing.
The original Children and Young People's Plan. Exactly what you mentioned there, teenage pregnancies was one of the main things. And, have they evaluated that? Have they cured? Have they reduced the numbers of teenage pregnancies? And we haven't had that evaluation.
One of the things that amazes me, and I know I'm Yeah.
52, 64, 86, and it is a worrying situation, because none of us know whether or not that child is in harm's way, is being educated to the correct standards, and and it's none of our business. We say it.
So just to remind members, obviously we'll come on to it in a minute, but the item for the next scrutiny meeting as proposed is exclusions in attendance and education other than at school. So you will get an opportunity at the next meeting to go into a lot more detail on that.
or is it not?
Yeah, I mean, this is for the next meeting, so we have to have a quick look at this. Yeah, basically we're just thinking about the sort of thing we might want to ask about and who we might want to invite to the meeting as well. So I think we've got suggested key witnesses here and our head teachers. But are there, is there anybody else that you would want to see in question about exclusions and attendance? Just head teachers at the moment.
Is home school?
It would come under education other than at school. So they could be the main.
If I make a suggestion to that next one.
Yeah.
There have been a couple of schools that have stood out on what they've achieved on attendance in the last academic year. Could we pull in the attendance officers for those?
That could be good.
What their strategies have been, how they've implemented and everything else.
Yeah, brilliant.
Because I think you can learn a lot from that. They're the people on the ground doing the work.
Yeah, sorry, just going back to Councillor Karen's point there. What was raised at Visioning was that there seems to be an increasing number of children that are either being excluded and not attending or being homeschooled. There seems to be a concern that there are increasing numbers that are not seeing their school life through to year 11. So anything that you feel that would encompass or be involved in that, you can ask to be included within the report.
There's very little we could do as a local authority. There needs to be some legislation in place so that we can do safeguarding for these children. I understand that there's a very fine line to be drawn here between parental authority over the child and issues around safeguarding. But if a child goes to school with a bruise, we investigate. Well, we can't investigate if the child is never seen. So to me, that creates an issue that perhaps, if we asked Lynn, even if we only asked her to come and she was unable to make it, it might help in drawing attention to the fact that we have our concerns as another local authority.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just drawing on that as well. I don't know whether it's information we can get prior to that meeting or for that meeting, but I'd be interested to understand if we know, if not all, of why children are being homeschooled in the borough. If we know reasons for some, are children being withdrawn because they're not receiving the support their parents feel they need, or are there other reasons outside of, I think homeschooling is right? Yeah.
Can I ask, and how does that compare with our other neighbouring authorities? Are their figures the same as ours, or higher?
I think. I don't know whether other members of staff have exclusions and behaviour in schools with the attendance remit. I know the member of staff within the school that I on the Governor's Art that has behaviour and attendance, which takes into exclusions as well, because it's a behaviour thing that usually leads to the exclusion. I think what we need to understand is what follow-up schools have, what responsibility schools have on that pupil that still remains on the roll, so therefore all the statistics come. If they haven't passed an exam, that goes on the school's thing. So how many children have been excluded that are still on the roll, and what happens to them? So I certainly think there should be a PRU feed-in somewhere, because most of our excluded children end up at the PRU. And if they don't, where do they end up? Maybe homeschooled or whatever. So, we need to understand what responsibility the school still retains of that child who's on that role, and how the feedback to that school on the improvements made, whether there's any qualifications obtained at the PRU. I never have any details of what qualifications are attained by the children who are attending the PRU. And then do we have, or what kind of movement do we have from excluded children back into their education other than the PRU? So do they come out of the PRU and go back into their mainstream school, that's what I'm trying to say.
Am I able to make a suggestion for performance information to be considered? I'd like to see, I know we have a Strive for 95 in Torfaen, I'd like to see a breakdown of each school's learning assistants, teachers and heads attendance. The staff. Because they you know, set an example for the children of Torfaen, and if they're not present themselves on a regular basis, then
to maybe suggest, again, around the homeschooling, I don't know, do we have a forum in Torfaen? I know most places do, and yeah, I mean, perhaps it's worth contacting them and asking if they would like to, you know, even if they don't come, maybe to comment on some of these issues and how they contact their parents, etc., etc.
Might even be a grant thing.
Exactly. I mean, I'm not saying that all parents will be linked into that, which is the problem, but how, you know, what do they do to, you know, promote it?
Mr Williams said, I know Dermot mentioned there are 2 schools that I think have halved their exclusion rates within the year, so if we can get some representation from there.
Impressive. I was going to say that I was trying to think of a surname. The lady in the council that usually attends school exclusions, Alison, can't think of a surname, because she's attended all the ones I know I've been involved in. And I'm trying to think of a surname. Yeah, you'll know. Yeah, because she's done a huge amount of them. From what I know, she's been in the team a long time, so she'll have a lot of useful background.
I think that's quite a bit to go on with it, and it's, you know, good to have some idea if you want to question.
Sorry, one more thing. I just need to check now with each meeting whether you think there would be any value in inviting the executive member along on that issue to question. That's a no? No? So we want to invite the executive member along.
Before, Rose, the truth is a weapon we use.
I'm going to. The missing is